On a foggy night along Interstate 87 in upstate New York, a promising 22-year-old engineering student named Marcus Lee was walking along the shoulder of the highway after his car had broken down. He had just called for a tow truck and was heading toward the nearest exit to wait in a safer spot. At approximately 11:47 p.m., a dark-colored SUV veered slightly off the road and struck him. The vehicle didn't stop. Marcus's body was later discovered by a passing truck driver, lying lifeless in the brush several feet from the asphalt. The force of the impact had thrown him like a rag doll. The driver was nowhere to be found, and evidence at the scene was scarce, save for a small fragment of a side view mirror, stained with blood. The community reeled from the sudden death. Marcus, the son of a retired fireman and a schoolteacher, had been well known and well loved. His funeral drew hundreds. Meanwhile, police were left with little to go on, and the investigation into the hit and run quickly went cold. 6 weeks later, a break came in the most unexpected way. A local mechanic in Albany, roughly 30 miles from the crash site, filed a suspicious report. A man had come in asking for discreet repairs on a Range Rover with extensive front-end damage. The man had paid in cash and had been agitated and insistent that no paperwork be filed. While he didn't give a name, the mechanic managed to scribble down the plate number just in case. That plate was traced to a rental car under the name Eric Donnelly, who had vanished from his apartment 3 days after crash. The name meant nothing to local law enforcement, but when run through national databases, the red flags began to appear. Eric Donnelly had an old record. 2 DUIs, both over 5 years old, and a disturbing paper trail of aliases, shell companies, and border crossing records. The DEA had once looked into him as a low-level courier suspected of ties to a cartel moving drugs from Canada into the U.S., but he'd vanished before they could build a solid case. Using security footage, phone records, and GPS data from toll booths, the authorities traced his route the night of the crash. Donnelly had left a known bar in Saratoga Springs, heavily intoxicated, and taken the interstate south. Traffic cams placed his Range Rover near the area of the hit at exactly the right time. But Donnelly had seemingly gone underground. Again, what began as a highway homicide case quickly transformed into something deeper. FBI agents joined the hunt after discovering encrypted messages on one of Donnelly's burner phones retrieved from a trash bin outside his apartment. These messages pointed to drug shipments, coded drop-offs, and references to cleaning up messes. The team followed leads across state lines. In Pennsylvania, a known associate of Donnelly was arrested during a drug bust and agreed to talk in exchange for leniency. He revealed that Donnelly was more than a courier. He was a regional distributor for a multi-state drug ring operating between Quebec, Vermont, and New York. He had been rising in the organization for years. The SUV he had used was a company asset, likely stocked with cash and drugs before the crash. The hit and run had been an unfortunate accident, but the real crime was what it exposed. Law enforcement worked tirelessly to decode the web of Donnelly's dealings. Surveillance led to stash houses, encrypted financial records, and even a corrupt local deputy who had been tipping off the ring. One key breakthrough came when a courier was intercepted at the Canadian border. His satchel contained a phone with location markers pointing to a remote farmhouse in the Adirondacks, Donnelly's rumored new base of operation. A joint task force organized a raid. The narrative of Donnelly's descent into the criminal underworld traced back nearly 2 decades. A high school dropout with a troubled home, he'd started by smuggling weed across the Vermont border. His charm and intelligence made him a natural leader, and soon he was working with mid-level cartel contacts. But Donnelly had also been on the wagon for years after his second DUI almost cost him everything. The night of Marcus's death marked his relapse. Investigators found a voicemail from Donnelly to one of his lieutenants the morning after the hit. "Something went wrong. I need to disappear. I can't clean this one." Despite his hardened image, the voice cracked with fear. Some speculated that the accident triggered old guilt, reawakening the person he once tried to bury. But guilt didn't stop him from running or continuing his operations. He simply grew more cautious. But the ghost of Marcus Lee haunted every safe house he fled to, and every burner phone he used. The farmhouse raid was swift and brutal. Armed agents stormed the property at dawn, catching Donnelly mid-call. The house was booby-trapped, but Donnelly didn't resist. He sat in silence as they handcuffed him during his trial. The prosecution painted him as a cold, calculating killer, a man who had not only taken an innocent life, but had profited off the misery of others. The defense attempted to argue that the hit and run was an accident, a moment of drunken panic. But the jury saw it differently. It wasn't just about the crash. It was about everything Donnelly represented. The lies, the drugs, the flight, the cover-up. He was convicted of vehicular homicide, obstruction of justice, and a dozen federal charges related to drug trafficking and organized crime. He was sentenced to life without parole at Marcus's final memorial, held 1 year after his death. His mother stood before a crowd and said, "My son's life was stolen by someone who thought he could hide behind the dark, but the truth has a way of finding the light." The case of Eric Donnelly became a landmark example of how a single crime, one selfish, split-second decision, can unravel an empire, and how justice, even when delayed, can cut through the fog of fear and silence.